The sky was calm at 30,000 feet. Sunlight pouring through the cockpit windows as passengers settled into their seats, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. Flight 227 from Denver to Seattle seemed like any other routine journey until the unthinkable happened. Midway through the flight, a sudden gasp came from the cockpit. The captain's hands slipped from the controls, his face pale, his breathing shallow. Within seconds, the co-pilot's panicked voice echoed through the cabin. "We need medical help." The pilot's down. Chaos rippled through the aisle. Passengers looked around, fear gripping their hearts as the aircraft began to drift off course. Among them sat a quiet man in his early 40s, wearing a worn leather jacket. He hadn't flown in years, not since leaving the Marines. But instinct took over when he saw the terror on the flight attendant's face. Without hesitation, he unbuckled his seatbelt and moved toward the cockpit, his mind racing against time. Every second counted. The plane was descending faster than it should. Oxygen masks dangled, a baby cried, and prayers filled the air. The ex-Marine took one look at the unconscious pilot, then at the trembling co-pilot struggling to keep control. His voice was steady but urgent. "Tell me what needs to be done." At that moment, the fate of everyone on board rested in his hands. The engines roared louder. The alarms blared in. The passengers could only hope he still remembered how to fly. The cabin was trembling now, trays rattling and passengers clutching their armrests. The ex-Marine Jake Lawson steadied himself as he slid into the pilot's seat. His hands hovered over the controls, memories from his military flight training flashing back like old film reels, desert skies, roaring engines, and the calm under pressure that had once defined him. But this wasn't a drill. This was real, and 173 lives were counting on him. Beside him, the young co-pilot's voice cracked as she radioed air traffic control. "Mayday, Mayday, Flight 227 declaring emergency. Captain unconscious, passenger assisting." Static filled the speakers before a calm voice replied, guiding them step by step. Jake glanced at the heart monitor strapped to the captain's arm, still no response. His pulse quickened, but his tone stayed level. "Focus on altitude and heading," he told the co-pilot. "We can't lose both." Meanwhile, in the cabin, a nurse rushed forward to help the fallen pilot, performing CPR while flight attendants tried to keep passengers calm. Through it all, Jake's mind stayed locked on the horizon. The instruments flickered. Turbulence shook the plane. He gripped the yoke tighter, his jaw set. The co-pilot looked at him nervously. "Have you ever flown this model before?" she asked. Jake hesitated, eyes fixed ahead. "Not exactly," he said quietly, "but I've flown worse situations." Outside, dark clouds loomed on the radar and approaching storm. The plane was heading straight into it, and turning back might not be an option anymore. The storm hit faster than anyone expected. Lightning flashed outside the cockpit, illuminating Jake's tense face as the plane shuddered violently. The altimeter dipped, alarms blared, and the co-pilot gripped the throttle with trembling hands. Every instinct told Jake to climb, but the storm's updrafts made even small moves risky. "Hold steady," he said firmly, though his heart pounded so loud he could hear it over the engine stot in the cabin. Fear had turned into a quiet panic. A little boy clutched his mother's hand, whispering, "Are we going to crash?" The nurse kept pressing on the captain's chest, refusing to give up, while a flight attendant tried to reassure passengers through the trembling cabin speakers. "Please remain seated, we're doing everything we can." But her voice wavered, betraying her fear. Back in the cockpit, Jake's military training clashed with the commercial flight system's complexity. He knew the basics: altitude, thrust, pitch, but this wasn't the fighter jet he once commanded. The co-pilot called out readings, struggling to keep her composure. "We've lost the right autopilot system," she said. Jake nodded, scanning the horizon, looking for a break in the storm clouds. "Manual it is," he muttered. Then the intercom crackled again, air traffic control's voice, tense but steady. "Flight 227, divert immediately. Severe turbulence reported ahead." Jake hesitated. The alternate route was longer, fuel was limited, and the captain's condition was worsening. Every choice carried danger, and every second of hesitation brought them closer to disaster. The cabin grew silent as the plane banked sharply, chasing forked light in the dark sky. Jake's gloved hands tightened around the controls, sweat slipping beneath his flight suit collar. The storm howled outside, each gust like a punch to the fuselage. The little boy's sobs had stopped. Everyone sensed the edge they were on. The co-pilot's voice came out tight, approaching minimum safe altitude. One wrong move, she didn't finish. In the back, the nurse's face was pale. The captain's monitors beeped faster. His skin showed no change, and time was slipping through their fingers. Flight attendants clung to the ceiling handles, their comm masks cracked. Passengers stared forward, some silent, some trembling. One man whispered, "Is this it?" The question floated through the cabin like a challenge. Lightning split the sky again, and the plane shuddered hard. The engines roared and shook as if waking from a nightmare. Outside the cockpit window, a mountain ridge loomed ahead and mapped by their flight plan. The alarms screamed terrain. "Pull up!" Jake's breath caught. A single wrong decision would cost more than just lives. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The warning blared louder, echoing through the cockpit like a countdown. "Terrain, Pull up. The mountain ridge ahead was closer than anyone realized. Jake pulled the yoke hard, the engine straining as the plane fought to climb. Oxygen masks dropped again. Screams filled the cabin, and coffee cups flew down the aisles. For a split second, the wings sliced through a thick cloud bank and then, just as the mountain's shadow loomed beneath them, the aircraft cleared it by what felt like inches. But the relief didn't last. The co-pilot's sharp voice cut through the roar. "We've lost hydraulic pressure." Jake's eyes darted to the gauges. Half the flight controls were no longer responding. The storm had damaged the system during the climb. He gritted his teeth, trying to steady the aircraft as turbulence slammed them again. The plane tilted dangerously to one side. "Manual's all we've got," he said, forcing the yoke back to center. His muscles burned with the effort. In the cabin, chaos had turned to stunned silence. The nurse shouted from the floor, "We're losing him again." The captain's pulse had flatlined, and passengers watched helplessly as she fought to bring him back. Meanwhile, air traffic control came over the radio, voice tense. "Flight 227, you're off radar. We've lost visual contact." Jake's stomach dropped. They were flying blind through a storm, with a dying captain, failing systems, and mountains below. Then, suddenly, an alert flashed across the monitor. "Fuel leak detected." The impossible just got worse. The cockpit lights flickered as the fuel warning blared across the panel. Jake's heart hammered, but his focus never broke. "We're losing fuel fast," the co-pilot shouted over the roar of the engines. Jake's eyes scanned the horizon. No clear land in sight, only storm clouds and flashes of light. The controls were stiff, the hydraulics nearly gone, but he refused to give up. "We can't make it to Seattle," he said. "Find me the nearest strip, anything flat enough to land on." The co-pilot flipped through emergency charts, her voice shaking. "There's an abandoned airfield 15 miles northeast, but it's not rated for commercial jets." Jake nodded. "It'll have to do." He angled the nose down slightly, feeling the aircraft groan in protest. The cabin lights dimmed, passengers clinging to one another as the plane descended through sheets of rain. Inside, the nurse called out, "He's breathing." The captain's chest rose weakly, and a wave of hope rippled through the cabin. But there was no time to celebrate. Wind tore at the wings as Jake aligned the aircraft with the tiny strip of asphalt barely visible through the storm. "Brace for impact," he shouted. The wheels hit hard, skidding across the soaked runway. Sparks flew, metal screeched, but somehow, the plane slowed, sliding to a stop just short of the airfield's fence. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the passengers erupted in tears and applause. Jake exhaled, trembling, and turned to the co-pilot. But before he could speak, the captain's weak voice came over the radio. "Jake Lawson, you were my flight instructor." For a moment, Jake couldn't speak. The storm still rumbled in the distance, but inside the cockpit there was only stunned silence. The captain, pale and weak, looked at him with a faint smile. "Didn't think I'd ever see my old mentor again," he whispered. Jake blinked, disbelief crossing his face. Years ago, he had trained dozens of pilots before leaving the service, but he never imagined one of them would be sitting beside him in the middle of a mid-air crisis. The co-pilot wiped her eyes, still shaking from the landing. "You saved us," she said softly. Jake shook his head. "No," he replied, glancing back at the cabin, where the nurse was comforting a crying child. "We all did." The passengers slowly filed out, many stopping to thank him, some with trembling voices, others just with tearful smiles. In that moment, it wasn't about heroism or training. It was about staying calm when everything seemed impossible. Emergency crews arrived soon after, guiding everyone to safety as dawn began to break through the clouds. The sun painted the wrecked but grounded aircraft in soft gold light, a quiet reminder that sometimes survival itself is a miracle. Jake stood at the edge of the runway, feeling the cool wind on his face. He looked back once more at the plane that should never have landed and whispered, "You still got it." Then he walked away, leaving behind the storm, the fear, and a story that every passenger on Flight 227 would remember for the rest of their lives.